stuck out of my mind. Aaron's recently written in for the Harvard Business Review, but one of the statistics you noted in there was that ChatGPT reached 100 million monthly users faster than any internet application in history. Amazing. It was the talk of the World Economic Forum in Davos, just ended in October. President Biden issued a somewhat sweeping executive order we want to talk about a little bit here in an effort to address the risks and the possibilities involved with this new technology. And as I was just reading my New York Times, I came across Matthew McConaughey, the pitch man for Salesforce. Is AI the Wild West? And if it is data the gold. So business all over it and looking for it. And then the business section, will chatbots teach your children? Child thoughts, interesting. This is an enormous area of investment and possibility, and a little bit scary, perhaps. So all of this to me is a bit overwhelming. I don't know if it is to you all or not. I'm not in the technology field, so as I got deeper into reading about it, the more sort of overwhelming it became. And so I wanted to rely on these folks who are much more expertise in this to get us to help us understand what AI is going to mean in our lives, and whether we should truly be celebrating the possibilities or running for cover where this is going to take us. So I want to come back to you, Maryam, and with kind of the business perspective. You hinted at this in your intro. And I'm curious what you're seeing right now is sort of the greatest influence in the business environment from AI, and what's on the horizon. What should we be excited about? What do you see?
A couple of things. Number one, when it comes to business, particularly big businesses, they are looking at this technology in a way that there's no going back. There is no way of saying, oh, well, why don't you wait a couple of years until we work out all the great issues that we need to address, the risks, the ethical issues, the legal issues, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to happen, and it is happening. So really the stress is on everybody. It's like moving a tire, a flat tire on a moving car. I mean, you try to change a flat tire on a moving car. This is really the best way I can talk to you about this situation. So to me, what is really important is to really focus on research and focus on sharing what we are learning as we are applying and researching these systems. Okay. So that's really an important thing. Even companies that may think, oh, we have asked our employees not to use ChatGPT in their tasks and operations. Everyone has a phone, right? It's being used. In fact, there was a survey that 68% of people who responded to the survey, it was a broad-based survey, they said they are using ChatGPT, but without the knowledge of their supervisors. So it is happening. We need to get in front of it. So what I'd like to emphasize here, you're going to hear a lot about those very important ethical, legal, and risk issues. You heard the expertise of this panel. But I also want to mention that if we find a way to manage the risk and the ethical and legal issues, and we will, and I tell you, again, there are companies that have started on that route and they are being successful. The opportunities are tremendous and there are great benefits. Let me give you just a couple quick examples. Research has shown that generative AI, when knowledge workers start interacting with it, it enhances their creativity, innovation, and their critical thinking. Just think about it. Such a major part of the labor, at least in the US, are knowledge workers. So if you can enhance their productivity by using a tool in the right way, I want to make sure that it is going to be incredibly impactful in terms of economic impacts of it.
Give us a quick definition of a knowledge worker.
A knowledge worker is an individual whose job primarily involves taking in information, cognitively processing that information, and coming up with a value-added output as a result of processing that information. And if you think about it, almost all of us, to a great extent, most white-collar workers are knowledge workers. There are very few like labor, manual labor kind of jobs. So every job has a knowledge component, but when we talk about a knowledge worker, it's someone that whose job is sitting at a terminal for hours and hours, search for information, process that information to create an output of value to the organization or to self or whatever. So that's what we mean by knowledge workers. And all professionals are knowledge workers.
I want to ask you, and then I want to go to Rachel on business. Many of the women in here are run businesses or part of big businesses. What should we be doing right now to prepare for AI in the workplace, both in a good way and to protect the business?
Sure, I think two major things. Number one, you're going to hear a lot more about bias, and bias comes as a result of biased data. So it's very important that the data that is used for training generative AI applications are curated in a way that is unbiased and accurate. So that's number one. And again, I can share later on that how some companies are actually doing that. Number two, focused and targeted training of people who are going to be using this technology. And the quick analogy that I want to say, you never give the car keys to someone that has no idea of how to drive, doesn't know how to navigate the roads, doesn't know what traffic signs mean, and say, go for it. There are some basic things that people need to understand about this technology. Prompt training is one aspect. Not only that, knowing what to prompt and what not to prompt. Understanding the risks. And because a lot of people inadvertently, because they don't understand how technology works, they get into issues that are very risky for the organization. So targeted training and really coming up with solutions around how to design and deploy the technology and using the right technological tool for doing that.
Let's go to Rachel.
Thank you. So I actually agree with what Maryam's last comment there. So policies, training, and education for everyone who's going to have access to that tool. But to the earlier comments that your employees are probably using ChatGPT on their phones anyways, everyone needs training. I'm giving clients training probably on average 3 times a week. Lately, different clients, nonprofits, big companies, small companies, because the problem is, and we were actually having a conversation in the ladies' room, the risks associated with generative AI are not intuitive, right? You can be the most savvy accountant or CEO or COO and have no idea how this stuff actually works. So I think it's critical both to give everyone who, again, is accessing the technology a base understanding of how it works and the risks associated. For example, how many of you know that when you put a prompt into the OpenAI version of ChatGPT, whatever you put in that prompt becomes publicly available and part of the training data set, right? So not everybody knows this. And so we had, employees of a nonprofit that putting PII into ChatGPT to try to, personally identifiable information, personal information, and having no idea that they just compromised the privacy of individuals, right? So that is critical. And also understanding, as both our professors, our ethics professors were saying, the limitations imposed by the data set. So if you cannot describe how the data set was compiled, right? What data was put in it? What is the quality of that data? Is that data biased to the point of, oh, we trained it on Amazon employees, 70% of which are men, or we trained it on all of the data across the World Wide Web, when we know there are large disparities in internet access, right, across race and geographic location. So that data is inherently biased. The other thing I think is critical because, and I am all for these tools. I use ChatGPT. I'm part of the committee at our law firm with over 3,000 attorneys that's rolling out artificial intelligence, tools for our practice. I think it's great, but you need to understand the risks and limitations and also use the right AI technology for the right purpose. I think what I've seen some businesses doing is they're so afraid of being left behind, in the AI wave, that they're like, all right, we've got to roll it out, we've got to put it in, but they can't actually articulate the value proposition of doing it, right? What problem are you trying to solve? Are you trying to save money? Are you trying to make something more efficient? Are you trying to improve accuracy, right? You really need to go through the process of thinking, why am I using this tool? What do I hope to gain? And then is this the right tool for the purpose? And then have I adequately trained my staff on how to use it appropriately to achieve the outcomes we're looking for?
And so real quickly, if I'm running a business or running a nonprofit, should I be thinking of AI training as this is an ongoing expense or thing I'm gonna need to do from here on out because the technology is gonna keep changing? This is not a one and done thing.
Yes, but it's not just the training that needs to be ongoing. You need to understand that if you roll out AI technology, because of the nature of the technology, it's machine learning. It can change itself, it can improve itself depending on whether it's a closed database that's training it or an open database. Your training data can change. So you need to understand that you're really signing up for an expense over the entire life cycle of the AI system to have appropriately trained people monitoring and overseeing and testing that technology again throughout its entire life cycle, right? This is not Microsoft Office where once you install it, you're done and maybe you hit updates every once in a while. It takes a much more active level of human oversight to be done ethically and responsibly.
I want to go to Justin to follow up on this conversation, but also something you mentioned in your intro. You talked about whether technology itself is value neutral, and that with AI we're seeing it probably isn't value neutral. It's whatever goes in is what's coming out. Can you go a little deeper on where you see that and how big a shift is that in our thinking about technology?
Sure, and the previous two speakers just sort of alluded to this, that if the data used to train the AI system is biased, then the outputs of the system will be biased. And there are lots of examples of this, whether it's facial recognition systems where the data used to train them consisted largely of the faces of white and Asian men, the people who were creating the system. And because those were the faces that it was trained on, it got better at identifying those faces than particular the faces of darker skinned people, and especially darker skinned women. There are examples in dermatology where there are algorithms that are used to identify skin cancer, and because they were trained primarily on lighter skin samples, they got better at that than on darker skinned ones. We talked about the Amazon one. Just one other example from the internet, you probably maybe heard of this a couple of years ago, but Microsoft put out a Twitter bot called, or a chat bot on Twitter called Tay, and it was trained on the inputs that when people would go and chat with it, it was trained on those inputs, and Microsoft had to take it down after less than 24 hours because it was spewing racist, sexist stuff. So the biases of the data will impact the outputs of the system. It takes, so we can curate data sets so that they don't reflect these biases, and it's really important to do that. I guess one last note on this is just a kind of a note of caution, which is that that's difficult to do. And just one example of this, there were two women, Joy Buolamwini, former Georgia Tech grad, and Timnit Gebru, who were the ones that identified the biases in facial recognition systems, and they actually sort of quantified the extent to which they performed more poorly on some groups than others. But in order to do that, they had to go out and create their own data sets. The data sets that were available didn't have enough darker skinned women in them to be able to even test how, how does this system perform on different groups? So they had to go and create a data set that they use to test the system. Right? So that can be done. Data sets can be created and used that are inclusive, that are diverse. It takes work, and it's not going to happen just by us hoping that will be the case.
Can you pass it to Edward? I want you to weigh in on this as well, and then maybe extend it to three of our four panelists. You included work in an academic environment and students and working professors. And how do you train folks in this regard to create the right data sets or change the data we may use?
That's a great question. I want to go back to the question you asked Rachel, and she's a lot more polite than I am. The answer to the question is what you have to do is you have to cough up the cash. And basically it's coughing up the cash for everything from determining that the program you're using is legitimate to the ongoing training, to updating, to security across the board. And I think that's going to be a major challenge down the line. Because if you stop and think about it in relationship to what my colleague said, unlike most technologies, as Justin said, it has human stuff embedded in it. Trains are morally neutral, right? Trains don't care where they go. They can take food to starving people, they can take people to God camp. AI is going to kind of embed what we do moving forward. And because of that, it's never going to have a level of neutrality that you just kind of turn it on and use it. So I think that's a particular concern. I think the other thing to think about, and Rachel was really on board with this, and Justin, is you have to be able to answer very, very concretely the why question. Why am I doing this? Why do I want it to accomplish certain things? And why does it matter for our company? And if you cannot answer those questions clearly, then you need somebody to help you figure that out and move forward with that. So that's where I think we really need to kind of think about our conceptualization, both of the technology and our use of it, because it's never going to be a plug and play technology. Finally, and Justin's kind of comment about the Microsoft chatbot, my concern always has been whenever they kind of let these things loose in nature, it always seems that the minor perturbation in the system at one point always sends it to kind of racism, homophobia, and sexism. And it rarely has sent us to kind of rainbows and unicorns. And I'm really kind of concerned about how the inputs can really begin to distort the programs moving forward. Yes, they can do tremendous things, but we have to be constantly on our guard about making sure that that's what they accomplish.
Thank you. That brings me actually back to our two folks here from Georgia Tech. The Georgia Tech turns out engineers, right? And now, as Ed was saying, how we build these systems and what goes in them reflects our own personal biases, potentially, the data sets we put, what we put in them. How does that change how we should be teaching engineers? Meaning, how, I guess I'm trying to ask, if an engineer is previously trained maybe on just how the technologies work, how to make them better, but not necessarily from a value standpoint, does that become, is it already part of the curriculum? Should it be? You don't want to take that?
Yes, first of all, I am not in the College of Engineering, but what I can say is that a lot of attention is being paid to this whole topic at Georgia Tech. In business school, I think what is really important, and I want to point out, is not only about engineering and the design. The decision to invest in and apply technology in general is typically made as a business decision. So I think the decision for business people to understand why and how they are using this technology is really important. The engineers created the technology, but how to apply it and for what purpose is typically done in a business environment. So that's an area that we pay a lot of attention to. And it's an area that in business school, it's one of the few business schools at Scheller College that we have a group of ethics professors for business ethics, and they're all over this in terms of the teaching and infusing it into the curriculum. One thing I was mentioned, Rachel mentioned that the issue of why we are doing this. Just to give you some sort of empirical evidence. I talk to a lot of executives about it because it's top of the mind for them. What do we do with Gen AI? What should we be doing, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the first questions is, what is the case use? How do you think we should start using this technology? And I say, how do you think we should be using the technology? It's a business decision. It's not a technology decision. So what are you hoping to get? What is the value you're trying to get out of this? For what purpose? Once you define that, then you back into technology. What is the data? What is the hardware? What is the algorithm? What is the cloud service that you have to use? And people just try to do it the other way around. Should we go with Microsoft Azure system? And I say maybe. Who knows? So that's a very important point that Rachel brought up. And also, Justin talked to about that. If it was up to me, knowing what I know now, which of course is not up to me, the whole idea of training these powerful technologies on the internet text is not a good idea. Why? Because what is on the internet is a mirror that reflects all of us with all the good, bad, ugly, and whatever, right? So if it was a way, but of course we didn't know that, in fact, even creators of ChatGPT were surprised at the capability that it demonstrated. But you know, the cat is out of the bag, so to speak. So it kind of got ahead of us. So we need to be really smart and work hard and invest. And this was an issue that Ed brought up. There are lots of smart people that can, if they get focused on these issues of risk, ethics, bias, blah, blah. This is not an insurmountable kind of an issue. We can solve it, but the motivation and the will needs to be there.
Can I make one comment? Yeah, really glad Maryam covered that last point. I just want to be really clear here. So all AI technology is not created equal. There are about, I think, 11 large language models out there in the world. Okay, and this is what, when we say large language model, we're talking about ChatGPT, Llama, DALL-E, right? And these are the systems trained on basically the entirety of the internet, as well as any other data they somehow connected data, right? They could sort of suck into their database. And so those, I think there's really nothing we can do to fix the data set, right? To make it unbiased. It is what it is. And so I think that's where the training and education and what do you use those tools for? And in addition, the computing power required to run those large language models is enormous, right? So 99.9% of businesses would never be able to run their own large language model. It's just too big, right? So we're talking about Amazon, Google, Meta. These are the ones that are out there. So when you think about, though, the other types of AI technology that you might be implementing in your own organization, that's where you can really get in, because likely the training data set either came from the vendor's other customers, or perhaps there's an option to just use your own business's data to train the model. And so just to be clear, because a lot of times I think our minds go to ChatGPT, and that's not always what we're talking about. That's a kind of very specific type of technology that has its purpose, but probably not a good use, you know, within most of our businesses.
Just say,
Yeah, you should.
just one more thing about the education piece. So I first of all I teach now a class at Georgia Tech on AI ethics and policy, and I do see a lot of enthusiasm amongst the students for learning about this, and so I'm very encouraged by that. I do think that it does require some maybe different ways of teaching ethics in engineering and ethics in technology to students just because of the issues about data that we're talking about. If you take like a different example here, I'm like way out of my league, but like thinking about, designers of new, jets and how, thinking about fluid dynamics and creating better designs for jets and things like that. You have engineers working on that, and you also have engineers collecting that data in accordance with sound engineering techniques and in very rigorous ways. And so the data collection and the engineering work is done according to very rigorous standards. What we're seeing in AI is we have this really, really complicated technical work on mathematical algorithms and new machine learning systems and things like that. And the data that we're using to train these systems comes from Twitter or from local police departments in Florida or whatever. And so there's a real disconnect between the sort of precision and detail with which we are putting toward the algorithms and then just like taking data from places and using them to train those systems. And so that sort of interface there, where we get the data, or, how we're curating it, what we're doing with it, and then interfacing that with the kind of technical work of AI creation and so on. I think that there's sort of there's innovative pedagogical work that's required in these spaces.
Is that gonna open up a whole new field of study or professorship?
It could very well. I honestly don't know where this is gonna go, but I do think that there's some, yes, I can see that.
Interesting. That's so fascinating. I want to go to the executive order for a second. So when President Biden signed this in, I think it was late October, and the White House put out a press release and they said, today, President Biden is issuing a landmark executive order to ensure that America leads the way in seizing the promise and managing the risks of artificial intelligence. The executive order establishes new standards for AI safety and security, protects Americans' privacy, advances equity and civil rights, stands up for consumers and workers, promotes innovation and competition, advances American leadership around the world, and more. Sounds pretty amazing. So I want to ask, maybe first from a legal standpoint, why an executive order and how powerful is this executive order?
Yeah. So I love the executive order, and I'm pretty sure that's the only executive order that I would ever say that about. If you read kind of nothing else, there's like maybe a 10 or so page summary of it that I highly recommend, because the order is so broad, it's well written, but it really touches on each and every sort of category of risk around AI, as well as the opportunities associated with it. So it is an executive order, so it's initially only binding on federal agencies. But what the White House is doing in this executive order is directing federal agencies, including those, for example, that regulate financial institutions and the FDA, right, to look into two main things. One is first see how their existing laws on the books can be used to enforce safe, secure, and transparent AI. And then to look at how their agencies can benefit from the uses of AI technology and how to provide appropriate oversight with that. And then obviously if the agencies do the research and they find there are gaps, right? We don't have laws on the books that can be used. They're going to then ask those agencies to write new regulations. So I think eventually this will trickle down, right, and apply to every business most likely. It'll take some time, and I think the why he did it as an executive order is because, right, legislation getting through Congress takes forever, and the White House rightfully saw that this was moving so quickly, they had to get something out there to at least provide a framework for companies to act now, to your earlier point, which we be doing now rather than waiting for legislation. Two other important things to note. One is that the executive order mentions several times something called the NIST AI Risk Management Frameworks. And folks familiar with that? So NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's a non-governmental organization, but they put out a lot of standards and frameworks for like cybersecurity and technology related issues. They have a really great risk framework. It's principle based, right? It talks about things like transparency and explainability and monitoring. And that's something we've been advising clients to start aligning to, as we think it will be at least the sort of base or version 1.0 of the risks of the standards, right, for safe, secure, and transparent AI. The other kind of interesting thing about the executive order is that it invokes the Defense Production Act, which I am not an expert on, but that's the law, right, that allows the federal government to direct private companies who are government contractors to do certain things in times of war or crisis or emergency. So they've declared the AI revolution sort of enough of an emergency that to the extent federal government needs IT workers, technology companies, right, to come and do things for the federal government to secure its systems, and to do other things, right, to progress, you know, the vision for the US leading the way with this technology. So that's a really key point. So I think we could see at any time that being used to bring in private sector into the government's efforts here around AI. And final thing, and then I'll hand it off. AI presents significant new cybersecurity risks, both because it is used as a tool to perpetrate hacking, ransomware attacks, those types of things, right? And if you heard of deep fakes, you can now use AI technology, right? And they can sort of make it sound like your CEO's voice and put a voicemail to wire money, right? So the technology itself is being used by the bad guys to commit more cyber crimes. And then the vulnerabilities of the technology, right? The same way you have to do penetration testing and vulnerability scans on your traditional technology, AI has those vulnerabilities and possibly more because of the self-changing nature of the technology. It's making it harder, right, to patch and keep those systems secure. So a lot of challenges with cyber, and I think that's probably the most likely place where the White House will invoke that Defense Production Act to get some help from private sector in there.
Let me just ask you one question. You did mention that, yes, getting anything through Congress right now is very difficult. But one of the criticisms I read after the executive order came out was, yes, but we still don't have comprehensive data privacy legislation. Are we gonna get that? Is that likely to happen?
I don't, maybe in my lifetime, depending how long that turns out to be. But the key thing is, and so the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and the FTC Act prohibits unfair and deceptive trade practices. And that's what's been largely used in lieu of federal privacy legislation, right? If your privacy notice says one thing and you do something different, then the FTC will come after you and say that was deceptive. Or if you're just using, you don't have a privacy notice and you're doing things with people's data, right? That is an unfair trade practice. And they're doing the same thing with AI. So they're investigating OpenAI. This is kind of the biggest ongoing investigation currently of OpenAI and ChatGPT for privacy violations, right? Did it pull in personal data it didn't have rights to? Did it appropriately protect against abuses of the system, right? Using prompt engineering to try to get it to disclose personal information or things of that nature. So I think two things, thank you for pointing out, privacy and AI are very closely intertwined, right? And the privacy risks are some of the biggest risks with AI technology. But I think for now, we're gonna see the same thing. We're gonna see enforcement by the FTC, and then we will see states like happened with privacy. So California already has something out on automated decision-making, and I think other states will follow. So I do often refer to what happened with privacy as what I kind of expect to see in the near term with AI is something high level, but really the states acting much more quickly to regulate.
Actually, really curious to get Rachel's response to this, but in thinking about the sort of connections between, you know, privacy and AI, You might have seen, I think last year, there was this kind of case in New York City where the owners of Madison Square Garden used facial recognition systems in order to deny entrance some people into their venues. In particular, they used it to identify lawyers who were suing Madison Square Garden,
Or just whose firms were
or
so.
whose firms were suing Square Garden. And so there was one example where this lawyer showed up with her daughter to see some like Christmas spectacular thing, and she was turned away at the door because of this. So there's a connection here between privacy and AI, because these facial recognition systems could use faces and without the consent of the people who had spaces, right? But that's not the case in every state. So Illinois, for example, has a biometric privacy law that requires informed consent. So in order for a company to use someone's face to develop a facial recognition system, they would have to have the consent of that person who has that face, right? And so a lot of this is happening at the state level, but I think this kind of thing is one of suggestive of the importance of legislation at the national level.
Yeah, you're just far too polite. I mean, the answer to the question is complete dereliction of Congress in kind of moving forward with this, and for all kinds of reasons. And I think, you know, demands of voters to kind of ensure that some sort of kind of privacy laws happen is going to be key. Now, the one thing we haven't talked about is how far ahead the EU is on all of this. I mean, the concerns about privacy in the EU has really begun to kind of far outstrip what's going on in the United States. And I think for at least kind of multinationals and large corporations, the rules from the European Union are really going to at least kind of drag some companies into kind of better protections. The question is, you know, as people begin to think about how they do business, I mean, are we going to get kind of a dragging effect for other companies, and that's an issue. So they're kind of bigger players in kind of making these decisions across the board than I think the federal government has been.
I want to make sure we leave time for questions, so I want to do just a quick last thought from all of you. And you can kind of do either one. Where do you see us in 10 years from now? Or if you could leave a room full of business and academic and nonprofit and arts leaders with one thought about AI, what would it be?
There is a saying that says we have a tendency to overestimate the short-term impact and underestimate the long-term impact of technology. And I think in this case, that's going to be the same thing. I think in 10 years time, given the life cycle of how this technology is evolving, we are going to be in a completely different world in terms of jobs, activities, the way we do things. And my sincere hope is that we address some of these very important risks and issues very quickly. So I think in 10 years, we're not going to recognize, I mean, we are going to think back about this and these discussions and say, wasn't that interesting? And by the way, someone mentioned the issue around privacy and cyber attacks with AI. Wait until quantum computing comes in. I mean, this technology is relentless. And honestly, unfortunately, we as human beings are falling behind in having the foresight, the wisdom to look ahead. And I think it's really time for us to really start looking at issues and think about technology and its implications in a much deeper way. So in 10 years, things are going to be really, really different. So
I think I can be pretty quick. I have absolutely no idea where we're going to be in 10 years. I do think that there are tremendous benefits or tremendous promises, tremendous opportunities that result from AI. I think that the concerns that have been raised here are really serious. And so I guess I hope that we will sort of unlock those or achieve those opportunities, achieve those benefits via a sort of healthy skepticism of the technology, not placing too much trust in it and not placing too much trust that things will work out unless we make it. So.
One of the great things about being trained as an historian, no matter what happens, you get to look down your nose over your glasses and say, it really isn't new, you know. I mean, it's a technology and it will be used for good and for ill. I mean, when the internet came on and the web came on, I mean, who would have assumed or presumed that huge percentage of the computing power on the web would be used for pornography? You know, I mean, we don't know, but it's driven by human beings, and human beings are going to use the technologies for all the things that human beings have used any technology for. They're going to use it to rob you blind, and they're going to use it to save your life. And the extent to which we can construct appropriate limits on its creation, its maintenance, and its deployment, that's going to determine where we are in 10 years.
I can't top that. That was fantastic. I agree. I think AI will be widespread. It'll be just sort of a routine part of our lives, but sort of the more low risk, you know, where the next Apple Watch will be AI powered in those things. And I think a lot of the drama around the technology will have passed, similar to when people first started moving to the cloud and people made air quotes when they said cloud and that kind of thing. So I think it'll be much more mundane, but widely spread. And then two thoughts I will leave you with. One is just ponder. I think the critical difference in what we're seeing now is that this technology, it has been around for a long time, but the latest iterations are just so much more powerful than anything we've seen before. And there's a number in the executive order of the computing power associated with models that have to be submitted to the federal government for review. And it's a number, like, I have no idea what that number is. It's like something to the 26th power or something. So take a look at that. Sorry.
Flops.
Flops. Okay, thank you. It's enormous. So that's the difference, right? This is really different. And then if you want a really fun, please don't judge, grounding in AI, there's actually a South Park episode about ChatGPT that I find hilarious. And that's a good, like, get your employees engaged training module, if you cut out the profanity. So take a look at that and the executive order, you'll be all set.
Thank you. Questions?
So, and I don't know if this falls into the realm of, I think this is for all of us, a lot of the mothers or individuals or corporate. Three of you are in higher education. What does it mean for K through 12 education? Because, like, I think about this and I go, like, I don't know if this is too long, but if I gave somebody money to make change and she had to take out her iPhone, she doesn't know how to make change. So, like, how are we going to continue to teach people how to think, how to use these tools, but how to not to block their ability to develop their own cognitive skills? How are we going to change lower education and higher? What is I know he's got it.
I know.
I don't know if I have an answer, but I have something to say. No, your point is of the utmost significance, right? I mean, I have this kind of saying that you have to know stuff in order to know stuff. And I mean, in your question about the ability to make change, right? You have to know how to add in order to know how to accomplish that, right? You're gonna have to know how to kind of do it. The challenge really is across the board about how we think about education and what education is supposed to deliver. I'll get on my soapbox for 2.5 minutes. I mean, basically, professional education in the United States creates an entire class of pathological narcissists. It basically tells all these people that they're smart, they're special. They're not. I teach them. And so they kind of are rewarded for being clever. They're not rewarded for being kind of wise and deep thinkers. I mean, that's what gave us the real estate collapse in 2008, right? This isn't thinking, this is cleverness. And I think how we think about both what we give students, why we give them what we give them, and what we reward across the board is going to be key, right? And that becomes the interaction with the technology, right? Is it, am I good, do I get rewarded for getting there fastest, or do I get rewarded for being there appropriately? And that's the question. Now, again, my last kind of flippant comment, I mean, that's the type of question to which if I had the answer, you wouldn't afford me to be able to speak to you. But it is important, right? I mean, because the influence of all of these things on everything we do at all levels of our lives is the unknown. And how can and under what conditions do we control the technology?
Let me go in the back.
Afternoon, thank you so much for sharing your insights and thoughts and discussion. There were a couple of comments, several around the data and the bias data and that data needs to be curated. We also know that it talks about human impact throughout, and we know humans are flawed, data is flawed, and some unbiased data, if you will, just doesn't exist. So I heard someone say, be careful about the influence period data, and how expensive it can be. But is it even possible? Is it even possible without
Just real quickly, I agree with you that it's not possible to have sort of, purely accurate, purely objective data sets. There are always sort of human decisions, human values that are going to be involved in the construction of data sets. I just think that we can distinguish between doing much better and much worse, right? I mean, I think there have been many examples of clearly biased data sets where just some populations just weren't present, right? Or weren't present nearly to a degree that would be required and clearly required if you just thought about it, right? And if you were really concerned about issues about disparate impact and discrimination and the like. And so I think that it's possible to do much better than we're doing, but I take your point.
Just very quickly, I agree with Justin, but I think the issue is, yes, it is possible to curate data that is less biased, less problematic. It's a quality control issue, right? If you look at financial industry, the Morgan Stanley's, Morningstar, Bloomberg, I mean, these companies are using generative AI capabilities already, but they have used all the information, research data and financial data that are more or less accurate, that they use for their decision-making anyway on a regular basis. But now they're making it a lot more available, they're making it a lot easier to search and ask questions about. So that's the kind of environment and circumstances we are talking about. So if you look at some of the pharmas, they are doing amazing things by using generative AI tools in drug discovery and identifying which proteins, construction and what disease. And they are really, this is a significant work that is going on. Yes, but the idea is that not to be careless and thoughtless about, well, Chad said this, it must be correct. And we really need to not put it on autopilot and some of our own judgment and decision-making in terms of output and responses we get out of these generative AI, particularly the ones that are trained on the internet.
Okay, one more comment.
One more comment, then let's go right.
One more thing to say about that. I do think that there needs to be thought about sort of the fit between the data and the problems that might be there, and then the uses to which the system is put. So, one of the sort of early examples of bias in AI systems concerned sort of systems that were used in criminal justice. So systems that were trained on arrest data and then used to, for example, influence decisions about penal sentencing and how long someone would be incarcerated for. Now, there are worries about biases in the data, and you're using that system for a really, really high stakes thing. That's worrisome, I think. There are other uses for a system like that, for example, the provision of social services where that's high stakes, but it's not quite, you know, going to prison, and how long are you going to prison for? And so some sort of, you know, putting some thought into, if we have, you know, potentially biased data set, what are appropriate uses of the system is also an important question.
Thinking more broadly, even in what you've been talking about, do any of the panel members have comments about artificial general intelligence, AGI, or super intelligence, or anything like that?
What I can say about that is I've heard about that term for years and years and years, because as many of you know, AI as a field has existed for like 70 years. And there are two camps. Ones that they say, yes, it's gonna happen, it's gonna be future, and there are ones that are gonna say, never, it's never gonna happen. So I think the jury is out on that, and in both camps, there's some really heavyweights that you would think their knowledge and their expertise really matters. But you know, it was an interesting thing that I saw at one of the conferences. General intelligence, the argument of this individual was that there is no such a thing, even for human beings, as general intelligence. Human intelligence is always specialized. It's so if humans don't have the way we think, you know, it's defined for artificial generalized intelligence, why do you expect machines to be able to do that? So that's an interesting way of looking at it, but it's a major debate, and I think the good news you asked us to predict 10 years. I don't think it's going to happen in 10 years, maybe not.
In light of the inevitability of AI, it's already operating, as you mentioned, it's been operating 7 years, or been around for 7 years.
17 as a field.
70.
Yes, as a
Oh.
field of research and study and application has existed for 70 years, but it's only the last 18 months that things are going crazy because of ChatGPT.
Is there not a national or international organization that would define standards and ethics for this movement? I mean, we're talking about jobs, that hasn't been mentioned at all up there, in terms of the amount of jobs that are going to be lost and that have real impact on people, even in the writing for authors. And you don't have to even just press a few buttons and you got a whole paragraph, a whole page done for you. So that kind of impact is going to be coming, I think, sooner than all of the quality control points, maybe, that you guys are trying to help put in place. How, who and what is going to be watching and overseeing that? It's sort of like running wild without any kind of draw in place, or.
Yeah, and so I think the NIST AI risk management framework that I spoke about is going to be it, and the executive order tasks that agency, which is calling for public-private collaboration. So they've been having working sessions, right? And a lot of the top tech companies in the world are collaborating with them to flesh out these standards. So it won't eventually be just a risk management framework. They'll have a security controls framework for AI and a developer's guide for AI, right? So I think we will see development and building standards coming from there. And then the other, as Justin was saying, the use cases. So for example, in the insurance industry, I don't know if anyone in this room is insurance, we've already seen, okay, so Colorado Division of Insurance, right, is telling you exactly how you have to govern your use of AI, and they're trying to tell people exactly how you test your systems for bias. So they're gonna pick specific high-risk use cases, right, such as life insurance underwriting, or claims where we know there's been historical bias in the data, and tell you how to test your systems. And because I got the opportunity to find on that, again, it's not necessarily problematic if your data set is biased, right? If you know it's biased and you either tweak your algorithm or put in the right mitigating controls, such as every denial of a claim for a person of color gets a human review, right? Something like that. So there are mitigations you can put so the outcomes of the uses of the AI system aren't necessarily biased, even if the data itself is biased. And I think that is what we'll see, but again, with privacy, I think we're gonna see sectoral laws and regulations. So financial services will be regulated, healthcare will be regulated, food and drug will be regulated, and actually Coca-Cola has an AI generated flavor, which I've heard is terrible, but I haven't. But yeah, human and AI came up with a new soda flavor. So I think, again, we'll see those specific high-risk use cases regulated first. And for the rest of us, right, just do it ethically and responsibly and align with some sort of industry standard framework in the meantime.
Real quick one here, one last question. Sorry.
So, my question is, what do you think this is going to do to democracy? You know, we already,
That's like a big.
as of yesterday, I guess we had our first AI, robocall to voters in New Hampshire telling that, with the voice of Joe Biden, telling them they don't need to vote on Tuesday. That it doesn't matter for the Democrats. So how do we, in this era of fake news and political polarization, how's AI going to affect our democratic institutions?
Glad we hit it on such an easy question. Yeah, it's, that's it, right? I mean, and again, it gets back to what several of my colleagues have said. It's how are people going to approach what they encounter? And if they're willing to believe what they encounter because it confirms what they already think, they're gonna go with it. They're not gonna ask questions. It's gonna lead people down rabbit holes. And that's going to be part of the regulatory question, right? I mean, how do you do with kind of deep fakes and photographs, right? Are you gonna have to kind of embed something in it? Well, the bad guys aren't gonna follow the rules because they're bad guys. But what's going to protect us? And again, I'm gonna do something I do with any piece I do with the paper or anything. I'm gonna throw it back to you. I mean, y'all are voters, y'all are community leaders, y'all are people kind of engaged in where we ought to be. I mean, I think our decisions about how we construct our future together are really about how we decide to act. And we can't act appropriately if we don't know. And so I think, the fact that y'all showed up for this, this day is kind of a positive thing, because we want to know more in order to do things better, so.
On that note, whoops, sorry, can we squeeze one more in?
Yes.
So I just had a quick question. Looking at in the past couple of weeks, we've had yesterday we had Dana Farmer, we've had 3 or 4 other big instances of AI discovering discrepancy in research. Is AI going to nitpick research, academic research to death, or is it going to enhance?
Both. I think both, right? Yeah, really, because again, it's how you apply it, how you use it, what are you hoping to get out of this, right? If the goal is nitpick and go over academic research, then sure, it can be done that way. On the other hand, if it is a tool to enhance creativity and innovation and support academic search and literature reviews and things like that, it's going to enhance it. So, yeah.
Please help me. Thank you so much for your whole perspective, your expertise, and sharing your time with us. Thank you all, everybody. Be safe, enjoy. We'll see you soon in the next one. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Really three quick things. And thank you so much again to our panelists and to Amy. Wonderful discussion. I think we are all leaving with probably more questions that we want to think about. Quickly, registration for the IWF conference in New York will open next week. And so that is the 50th anniversary World Leadership Conference, which is likely to sell out. So please be on the lookout when that registration opens. I am planning to be there and looking forward to connecting with IWF sisters from across the globe. Next program is Sunday, February 11th, the Atlanta Ballet's Coco Chanel, the life of a fashion icon, at the Cobb Energy Performing Arts Center. So it's ticketed event, so please make sure you check the wonderful website, by the way, where everything is listed. And then International Women's Day coming up Friday, March first at Georgia Pacific again. We would love all of our members to be there, to bring young women with you, to really experience a fabulous day. Someone, Leona, really quick, you said you have one. Mhm.
Please expect an email from, Jennifer on our path. We're going to ask each of you to record a quick 30-second video. I'm gonna let you have. And you can be as nice or as serious as you like. But we will actually tell you the name, maybe title, and then a quick statement. But most of that is we'll do some fun things. So we can say you can make.
Thank you, Leona, and that is for International Women's Day. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week.
Thank you.